Bermuda's national flower is a small purple iris. That iris grew out of the ashes of a woman that was burned alive at a crossroads in the 1700s. So let's find out what happened. "No use hurrying, folks," she says. "There'll be no fun till I get there." Sally Bassett is cracking jokes on her way to the stake. She's an elderly woman walking slowly and carefully to her death in June of 1730. She's not alone on her walk. There's a crowd moving with her. People are cutting across yards, climbing over walls, pushing past each other to get a good spot near the stake. But who is this woman? We don't know exactly what year Sally Bassett was born, or where in Africa her people came from, or how she ended up enslaved in Bermuda. What we do know starts much later, when she's already an old woman and a grandmother. By then, she's someone whose value for those who rule the island has become minimal. Okay. First, let's back up a little bit so you can get the full picture, because Bermuda is not the Caribbean most people picture when they hear the word slavery. For one thing, Bermuda is small, like really small. A few dozen square miles of coral and cedar out in the Atlantic, closer to North Carolina than to Jamaica. So it's not actually in the Caribbean Sea. Technically, it sits up in the Atlantic on its own, but it is part of the Caribbean community today, and its history runs straight through the same slave trade as everywhere else in the Caribbean region. Secondly, the soil on the island is thin. That size and that soil combined is mostly why it never became a plantation colony the way Barbados or Jamaica did. And by the late 1600s, Bermudians, both those who owned people and the people who were owned, had turned to the sea instead. They spent their time shipbuilding or salt raking down in Turks and Caicos, fishing, salvaging wrecks, whaling, and turtling. The economy of Bermuda was built on getting on a boat and going somewhere else to make money. So enslaved men in Bermuda were mostly not working fields. They were carpenters, caulkers, the men who sealed the seams between ships' wooden planks, and sailors. These men were skilled tradesmen, working the ships their enslavers owned, sometimes sailing those ships for months or years at a time. Which means that while the men were gone, the women were the ones left running the households, cooking, nursing the sick, and raising children who weren't their own alongside children who were. Bermuda's black population in these years was somewhere around 3,700 people. That's a small, tight world where enslavers and enslaved families were tangled up together for generations. This is the time in which Sally lived. By 1729, the man who had claimed to own Sally was already dead. He had been a blacksmith over in Southampton Parish, and when he passed, a few years earlier, he left behind a will. In that will, Sally isn't mentioned as a person, but as property, alongside his tools and his land, and she's passed down to his children as if she was an interesting couch. Now, when property changes hands like that, it gets valued. So the children had Sally appraised, and she was valued at £1, 4 shillings, and 6 pence, which was barely anything, because she was old, and she was considered close to useless for labor. But Sally kept working. She knew plants and medicine, and on Bermuda and across the wide Caribbean, enslaved women were very often the people everyone turned to when someone got sick. And this included the households that enslaved them. Sometimes they were even trusted more than European doctors. So Sally kept practicing in Southampton Parish. She had by that time also already been marked as trouble. Back in 1712 or 13, she had been accused of threatening people, damaging property, and killing livestock. and she was whipped for that. So by the time 1730 comes around, the island already has some ideas about who Sally Bassett is. Her granddaughter, whose name was Beck, was enslaved in a different household, the property of a couple named Thomas and Sarah Foster. In December of 1729, Sally's granddaughter is accused of putting something in the Fosters' food. Poison, according to the record, along with poisoning a third person in that household, an enslaved woman named Nancy. All three of them get seriously sick. Sick enough that it takes months before they're even well enough to appear in court. The word on the street is that Sally Bassett is the one who gave her granddaughter the instructions for the poisoning. However, nobody arrests Sally for another 6 months. The people who say they were poisoned with instructions supposedly given by her spend 6 months recovering before someone finally comes for her. Bermuda in these years is a colony that is scared. Between 1725 and 1730, roughly 2,000 people leave the island, the governor himself blaming it on the poverty of the place. Britain has just pulled its militia out. So you have a shrinking, anxious colony worried about attacks from outside and worried always about what's happening inside their own houses, at the hands of the people they have enslaved. A poisoning accusation lands hard in a climate like that, and it isn't just an isolated event. Also, this isn't only happening in Bermuda. Poisoning accusations against enslaved people were one of the most common charges brought against them anywhere in the Americas in this period, because enslaved women were so often the ones with access to the kitchen, to the sick room, and to the medicine cabinet. The same knowledge that made them trusted made them suspected the moment anything went wrong. Decades later, a poisoning scare gets blamed for thousands of deaths that modern historians now think were probably caused by spoiled flour. This is a pattern across the whole Atlantic world. Colonies that knew somewhere underneath everything that the oppressive system that made them rich also made them justified targets. Sally Bassett is finally arrested on June 2nd, 1730. Her trial happens at the State House in St. George's over a matter of days. 10 witnesses testify against her, including Sarah Foster herself, dragged out of her sickbed to do it. Beck testifies against her own grandmother too, almost certainly because it's the only thing that might save her own life. And it works, because Beck is acquitted, but Sally is not. When the Chief Justice asks if she has anything to say before sentencing, her answer is recorded as, "I never deserved it." The charge against her was called petit treason. That's a legal category built for a servant who kills a master, or a wife who kills a husband. It's about betraying a bond the law considers sacred. The slave owners apparently felt that those they owned had a sacred duty to them. Now, we don't know if Sally Bassett did it. The record can't actually settle that. But what seems to be the case is that a colony in freefall needed someone to burn. And Sally was old, already devalued, and flagged as a troublemaker. Whatever the truth was, the outcome was mostly decided the moment she was accused. The sentence was as follows: to be conveyed to the place of execution, where a pile of wood is to be made and provided, and there to be fastened to a stake and burnt with fire until her body be dead. She is executed at a crossroads in front of a crowd as a message to everyone watching. It's remembered as an unbearably hot day, so hot that Bermudians still to this day sometimes call a scorching afternoon a Sally Bassett Day. And what about the flower? Well, the story goes that where the fire had been and where her ashes were, a small purple iris came up. People said she told them there would be a sign that she was innocent. That flower is the Bermudiana. It's Bermuda's national flower now. It grows all over the island, in the sand, on the rocks, and wherever else it chooses to. In 2008, Bermuda put up a statue of Sally. It's 10 feet tall, bronze, and the arms are bound behind her back at the stake. It was the first monument the island had ever built to an enslaved person. And it didn't come easy. There was a real fight over where it should even stand. The court that convicted her is long gone, along with the men who sat on it. But Sally is alive in the beautiful iris of Bermuda, and so she shall remain.